So, welcome to a new decade. Oh boy, 2020. My goodness, time does fly fast. But I want to, I sort of almost want to apologize for what I'm about to talk to you about. Because starting off a new decade, you want to start off as positively as you possibly can. But before I can do that, before I can get to the positivity, I just want to point out some of the issues that confront our world, and then talk about the opportunities that present themselves to us in this new decade. So how many of you know a guy named Marty Sampson? Most of you probably don't, but Marty Sampson was one of the principal participants in Hillsong. And Hillsong is one of the most popular and prolific creators of Christian music in the whole wide world. In the whole world. It is a really important component of the evangelical Christian world. Well, back in August, Marty Sampson renounced his faith after many, many, many years. Huh? Sorry? Marty Sampson is his name, of Hillsong. Okay? If you don't know who's Hillsong, look it up. They're like yeah, well, he's one of the principal guys, writes a lot of the music, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, back in August, he renounced his faith publicly, by the way, on what else? Twitter, and all that stuff. And, of course, it created a tremendous stir in the world, in the Christian world, right? That's such a faithful person, someone who's produced all of this magnificent music and all this glorious love of God and all whatever whatever their music. I'm not a big Hillsong fan, but anyway, a little while later, David French, who is a writer for the National Review, wrote an article commenting on it. It was an article entitled "Hillsong United's Marty Sampson Christian Faith is Lost." It was printed in the National Review. And this is what he had to say, not so much about Marty himself, but about this whole attitude in general, which I think is very important. He said, as our culture changes, secularizes, and grows less tolerant of Christian orthodoxy, I'm noticing a pattern in many of the people who fall away. Again, only Samson can know his own heart. They're retreating from faith not because they're ignorant of its key tenets and lack the necessary intellectual theological depth, but rather because the adversity of adherence to increasingly countercultural doctrine grows too great. Put another way, the failure of the church isn't so much of catechesis or learning, but of fortification, of building the pure moral courage and resolve to live your faith in the face of cultural headwinds. I don't necessarily agree with everything he just said. I think there's something wrong with the catechesis of the church that causes these people to fall away. But we'll get back to that. I'm also reading a book called Faith No More, because I am really concerned that across the board in religious communities, not just in Christian communities or in Jewish communities, but in communities everywhere, fewer and fewer people engage, especially among the young. So I'm reading this book about called Faith No More, and in it they have a young man named Nathan who was a believer for his whole life until he got into his, later on in his life. And he said this is what he said in this book. He said, I remember the day that I rejected Christianity. It's weird, but one day I was driving to the gym to work out, and I thought about a good buddy of mine who was in a wheelchair. He was a brilliant guy. I thought to myself, if Rick got up out of that wheelchair, it would be on CNN. If a blind person got healed, it'd be on CNN. I watch CNN every day, and I've never seen a story about a paralyzed person or a blind person. So then I thought, does God heal? I'd already kind of come to that conclusion, but this way of thinking in terms of it is a fact in my mind that the God of the Scriptures that claims to be a healer does not heal today. Then I concluded that if God doesn't heal, then the God of the Bible doesn't exist. If the God of the Bible doesn't exist, then I don't believe in God. It was really that simple. So here's a guy who was told something about God, and he didn't see it coming true, so therefore the whole thing must be a bunch of malarkey. And lest you think this is just some sort of Christian problem, by the way, in an article by a man named Gene Demby on the NPR website called A Rapid Switch for Jews Away from Religion but Not Jewishness, he said this: a big survey by the Pew Center is out today. This is October 2013, and I've read that survey, by the way. You know, it's disturbing. It says there's a big survey out by the Pew Center on Jewish life in America, and it shows a stark shift away from religious belief and toward cultural identification. 9 in 10 American Jews born before World War II identify themselves as Jewish by religion, but nearly a third of Jewish millennials, that is, people born after 1980, identify as having no religion at all. And just as starkly and perhaps relatedly, the rate of Jews marrying outside the faith has been steadily on the uptick. Among Jews who married before 1971, only about 17% were married to non-Jews. But for those who married after 2000, 60% married people weren't Jewish. So the rate went from 17% in 71 to 60% into marriage rates by 2000, and it's probably higher now, 20 years later. So that study found, and here's the more disturbing part than just marrying out, that's not the biggest problem. The study found that 80% of Jews who married outside the faith consider themselves not to be religious. So you have 60% of Jewish people marrying out, 80% of whom don't think of themselves as religious at all. And nearly 2/3 of that group were not raising their kids as either religiously or culturally. So they're gone. That shift echoes a broader move by Americans away from claiming membership to a religious faith, and that's all Americans. So I just painted, here I am starting the new decade, painting a very dismal picture, right? I don't see it as a dismal picture. I see it as a glorious opportunity. I'm convinced that the reason many people lose faith or never even consider the life of faith is because they are never presented with the truth. This is the problem. As I read through this book, I've told you, Losing Faith, there's story after story, it's all case histories and studies, of people who were told lies by their churches, their leaders, their communities about what the Bible has to say. To me, this is the biggest problem we face. It's a big book. It has a lot of stuff in it, and some of it's not so fun and so not disturbing because the human experience is not good, generally speaking, particularly when we decide we want to wander away from God. But if we told people the truth, then they wouldn't have to discover that that their whole life was a pack of lies when somebody in college shows them something very difficult and ambiguous in the scriptures, so that the whole foundation of their life falls apart, which is what's happening. Because you see, brothers and sisters, this is a big problem in this country. There's a big, big, big problem. So let me give you some more depressing news before I go on to the Besorah, okay? This was in an op-ed piece in New York Times just yesterday. And it was written by a man named Lee Siegel about why why are we so depressed. He quotes these statistics. The American Psychiatric Association reported that from 2016 to 2017, the number of adults who described themselves as more anxious than the previous year rose 36%. In 2017, more than 17 million American adults had at least one major depressive episode, as did 3 million adolescents ages 12 to 17. 40 million adults now suffer from anxiety disorder. Nearly 20% of the adult population, these are the known cases of depression and anxiety. The actual numbers must be dumbfounding. The really sorrowful reports concern suicide. Among all Americans, the suicide rate increased by 33% between 1999 and 2017. 33%. All of this mental carnage is occurring at a time when decades of social and political division have set us against each other, black and white, men and women, old and young. Beyond bitter social antagonisms, the country is racked by mass shootings, the mind-bending perils of the internet, revelations of widespread sexual predation, the worsening effects of climate change, virulent competition, the specter of antibiotic-resistant bacteria grinding student debt, and crises in housing, healthcare, and higher education. The frightening environment helps cause depression. Depression causes catastrophic thinking, and catastrophic thinking makes the environment seem even more terrifying than it is. Are you depressed already? Have I depressed you? No. Do you understand what's happening here, people? The further we move away from spiritual life, the more into this cesspool we go. And this is why we have an opportunity, because we have a message of hope. We have to be that message of hope. And so I'm going to give you some good news now. So Tom, if you have a Bible or an app or whatever you have, because I'm not flashing it up on the board, turn to Psalm 46 with me. Psalm 46. I'll read you the scriptures. Because in the midst of all of this mishigas, I can't even say it, I'm tongue-tied. Madness. Comes the power of our God to change it all. And this is the message that we have. I'm challenging you. This is your responsibility, because you're going to watch your neighbors die. You're going to watch them overdose on drugs, fall victim to all kinds of madness if we don't do something about it. In Psalm 46, verse 1 through 3, it says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam through the mountains, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. Listen, we have a God who is present. But he's not a figment of my imagination or of yours. He is real if you will depend on him and if you will teach others to depend on him. You can always walk through this life alone, but I just showed you the statistics. You're in trouble if you do. But if we walk together with our God, he will be there. Not save us from every woe. God, a very present help in trouble. That means you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble. I'm not going to lie to anybody and say, oh, gee, just come to the Lord and you will never suffer again. Don't worry. Everything will be well. That's a lie. It's a lie. But I know this, he is there with me in the midst of my trouble. And together, he can help me work a way out. I believe in God's ability to help me work a way out if I am willing to do what he wants me to do. Now, that might not even be pleasant. It might even be hard. But I know that I will see the other side if I stick with him. You have no guarantee. Go ahead, take on OxyContin. See where it gets you on the other side of that. It may kill the pain today, but your pain will be worse tomorrow. We may choose to isolate ourselves and die alone. But that doesn't seem like a very fun way to go. No, he is a very present help in the trouble that I know I will enter sometime in this life. But we will not fear. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth should change. The earth is changing. It's always changing. It's changing again. Who knows what tomorrow is going to look like? And even though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, no matter what happens, whatever catastrophe, and there will be catastrophe, but we have a God who is good and faithful. If we stick with him, we do what he says. If we try to order our lives in the way he wants us to do it, he can make life better. This is something the world desperately needs to hear. This is the power that we have. We need to share this power with those people out there who think they're making it but are not. Who lives lives of quiet desperation and not so quiet anymore ever since Twitter. You see? It can be done. That's our power. Use it because he's given it to us through Messiah Yeshua. Secondly, it goes on to say in verse 4 and following, it says there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations made an uproar. The kingdoms tottered. He raised his voice. The earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. There's a promise that we have to share with people everywhere. I go over those statistics again and I think about them. 33% increase in suicide in just a few years. We have something to share, a promise of a brighter day, of a river whose streams make glad the city of God, that we can help them to come into the city of God rather than into the city of the evil one, giving themselves over to dark thought, seeing no way out. You see, we have that. That's why this place should be filled up. That's why every place, every house of God should be filled. But evil one has gotten his voice into the heads of so many people. This is how it works, people. I've talked to some of you about this. We isolate ourselves, and then there's that voice in our head that's just making us feel worse and worse and worse. Instead of being with God's people, being encouraged and strengthened by the power of the Spirit and the Word of God. Don't let him do that to you, because that's the way he wins. We have a promise that God will be in the midst of this city, with us, dwelling with us, caring for us, showing us the way through to the other side of our misery. I am a hopeful guy in that respect, I really am. I believe in the future of God's people. I believe in the future of this world. Listen, I know how the story ends. I've read it many times. So I know that we win in the end. But if you want to be there, then you have to believe in the end, not in the way in which we get there. Because the way we get there may be tough. It may be hard. We may have to actually work to get there. But we will. If we believe that God is with us, and that belief turns into a life that reflects that reality. Because that's what draws people. You see, just because I believe all this stuff, why should anybody else care? These guys, whatever his name was, Nathan. I read a story, another story about two brothers, Robert and Ed, who grew up as, Pentecostal Christians their whole lives. And yet before they were through college, they both rejected their faith. Why? They believed all of that stuff. They believed everything they were taught all their years growing up. Every once in a while there'd be a little doubt, but they could never question anything. They could never really probe into it. And then they started, get a little bit more becoming a little more of a critical thinker. And they see things that look like inconsistencies in the Word of God. And they start saying, well, if that's wrong, how come that's not wrong? How come that doesn't work? Because they never taught how to think. All they're taught is hocus pocus. Never truth. We have a promise. God is in the midst of her, and she will not be moved. God will help her when her morning dawns. That means we're going to need help. The nations will make their uproar, the kingdoms will totter, but the Lord of hosts is with us. And all of this is going to meet with the resistance from the nations. Everything is against us, people. Let's say popular culture. I shouldn't say everything, but popular culture runs contrary to what we hold as truth. But we have a promise that we can hold on to. And finally, we have our proclamation. And here's the challenge to you and to me, to everyone who's a true believer. Verse 46 and 8 and following, he says, "Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. Cease striving and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come, behold the works of the Lord." This is the gospel. That we have a community of people who live out the power and the promise that God has given us. That becomes our proclamation. And I just gave you all the stats. We live in a target-rich environment, people. There are so many desperate souls out there that are looking for something to hold on to. We can be that. For their sake, we can be that. That's our challenge in the new year. So I'm going to challenge every one of you that this should be a year of outreach for us. It's going to start at my home. I've decided I'm going to do something. Number one, you're all invited, but only if you bring somebody. So, first Fridays every month for a nosh and discussion. The first Friday, first Shabbat of every month, starting in February. We'll be at my house, 6:30 to 9. Come, have a little something to eat, we'll say the prayers, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to talk and invite and hopefully encourage people to join with us for the sake of the kingdom. And I invite all of you to do something similar in your own homes. Bring people there. Talk to them about the things that I just told you. They're a reality. Listen, if 33%, let me read that statistic to you again because it's killing me. 40 million adults now suffer from anxiety disorder. You know some of them. You live with some of them. I think we better start doing something about it, don't you? So this is a call to action, not just me sitting there pontificating. I'm doing. Because I want to be able to share good things with people who need them. So who's with me? You going to be with me this year? Because this is going to be a year of outreach. Don't sit on your tuchus, because I won't take it this year. This year, I'm going to be all over you. All over all of you. Because this cannot wait. When I read things like this cannot wait. Don't be sitting on your butt waiting for Messiah Yeshua to show up on your doorstep. Be him or be like him in this world. At the end of his article, David French went out and he wanted to know if people really were willing to share the good news. Believers, you know, so why aren't we sharing? And he asked a number of people this, so he asked a simple question. He said, are you faithful? I'd submit to you that you don't know until that faith is truly tested, either in dramatic moments of crisis or in the slow, steady buildup of worldly pressure and secular scorn. As the worldly pressure and secular scorn continue to mount, expect to see more announcements like Josh Harris's and Marty Sampson. Expect to see more friends and neighbors retreat and conform. The church has its faults, yes, but the blame will lie less with a church that failed to instruct than with a person who didn't ultimately have the courage to believe. He had interviewed a young man who was a believer, and he said, well, have you ever tried to share the gospel? He says, well, you don't know what it's like. You can't do that in my business. If you do it in my business, oh boy, that's the end of you. And so he came up with that comment. Do we have the courage to share what is indeed countercultural? Our faith in Messiah is countercultural. It should be. Yeshua was a subversive. He overturned the world in which he lived. And his disciples turned that world upside down because of their willingness to believe in the power of God, in the promise, so that they might have the willingness to proclaim. May we do so in this new year. Holy One of Israel, Lord, give us the strength to believe and to act. We can't just sit on our hands while the world dies. There's so much good here among you. Lord, if people knew what it was like to stand in your presence, is to feel you there, to know that when there is a difficulty, I can stand on that foundation and walk with courage through my difficulties and make it to the other side. If they knew these things, they'd throw away their drugs. They'd throw away their crap. They'd give away their anxieties. They'd fill themselves with joy. Help us to be your people, because we have an answer that you have given to us. And he is with us at all times. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change and the mountains slip into the heart of the sea. Amen.